Hopefully on the way in you grabbed one of these sheets of paper in your bulletin, or there was extras out there on the welcome desk. You get to take a few notes today if you want in the sermon, but a little opportunity to interact with that. We did, as Pastor Mike mentioned at the beginning, we did receive a generous gift of brand new soundboards. And so we're very thankful and grateful for the person who has donated those. And then also on top of that, we've had Jim and Eric and Don and Chris and a few others spent a lot of hours, and we'll spend a lot more hours still trying to get this thing figured out and all put together and all that. But we are thankful for the gift, and we're thankful for the workers who are helping put it all together. And it will supposed to sound a lot better and a lot nicer and easier to run and all that kind of stuff. Our online sound should be great and all that once it's all figured out. Today is the test day, right? But we're thankful for those guys scrambling back there trying to make all those adjustments for us. We are in the middle of our fall sermon series called Bless Our Community. And we've spent time this fall, if you haven't been with us, we've spent time this fall talking about ways to bless our community. If you've been with us, you've noticed one thing missing. Through this whole sermon series, I have not mentioned one thing that you should do to go bless the community. In order to bless the community, you have to be available to God. You have to be ready to God. And so we've talked about the fact that we look at Jesus as our superhero and we serve him and he shows and guides us and gives us the way. We've talked about the fact that we need to have our hearts clear for him. We've talked about the fact that we are called to be his ambassadors, to go and share his good news with those around us. We've talked about the fact that we need to know our story. When it comes to being a Christian, when it comes to accepting Christ into our lives, we need to be able to know how to share how Jesus has made a difference in my life. And we've talked about that. And last week, Pastor Aaron talked about we need to be open and looking out in our community for ways to take care of each other and take care of those around us. And that is one thing that you hear me say a lot, right? We talk about the fact that our church mission is to help people connect with what it means to love God and love people and have fun, right? We want to teach people what it means to love God, and that's why we gather for worship and for Bible studies and other times. We want to teach people what it means to love others, and we love others by loving people in our church and loving our community, and balance and finding that balance with it all. And then we want to have fun, right? We have the joy of the Spirit in us. We don't want to look like we've been baptized with grape juice and just sour all the time, but we are happy, joyful people. Even in times when we're crying together, there's a joy of the Lord that carries us through and helps us guide through it all. And so we've been looking this fall at just, what are we doing for ourselves to have ourselves ready to be the representation of Jesus to our community so that we can truly bless our community. And we're going to continue with that theme today, and today we're going to look at excuses, right? We're going to look at the fact, what are some excuses that we have for why we don't do the things that God wants us to do? What are the excuses we use to sit back and just be comfortable and just do our thing and not worry about anybody else? What are the excuses we use to look at God and say, God, I know you really want me to do that, but I'm just not comfortable with it. And we all have excuses. We all have reasons for why we do the things that we do. We all have choices that we make, and within those choices, then we have reasons why we don't do certain things. And so God speaks to us and says, you need to get rid of your excuses. There can be no excuses. You're either serving me or you're not. We're either journeying through this life together or we're not. And so the excuses need to kind of go. And so we're going to look at someone who had a lot of excuses. That God called Moses, and Moses tried to give God all kinds of excuses for why he couldn't serve the Lord, why he couldn't do what God wanted him to do. Moses was out, excuse me. Moses was out, he was out being a shepherd, herding with a herd for his father-in-law out in the desert. And while he's out there in the desert, he sees a very interesting sight, right? He sees a bush that is on fire, that flames are coming around, but they aren't burning it up, right? They're just there. And so Moses goes up to that to see, kind of, any of us would, like, why is this happening? And so to see what is going on, and he goes up to it and finds out that it is God who is there with them. And so as he approaches, God starts speaking to him right away, right? Take off your shoes. This is holy ground. Now come and let's talk. Moses, I have a plan, and I have a plan for you, and a plan for you to bless your community of people. And this is what it's going to be. And so they start to have this dialogue together. And so in Exodus chapter 3 is where we see that dialogue starting to happen, right? Starting at verse 11, we see this. God challenges Moses, and then Moses' first excuse is verse 11. Who am I to go to Pharaoh and to bring Israelites out of Egypt? Excuse number one by Moses. Basically, he's saying, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Moses was content with living life as a shepherd there in Midian. So content that he probably rarely thought about the reasons why he was out there in the desert in the first place. He probably didn't think much about what his life was like back in Egypt and the different things that had gone on and why he was running and why he was now hiding in the desert. He probably was able to just get rid of all those thoughts in his mind and just let it all go. But then God brings it all back to him. God says, Moses, I want you to go to Israel, or I want you to go to Egypt, and I want you to free the Israelites, to free your people from their slavery to Egypt. You are to go before Pharaoh and demand that he lets the people go. And we'll have all this plan. You will take them and they will be free. And then we'll go to the promised land and things will be good between us and my people again. And Moses is flooded and overcome with all the reasons why he had left. And so he gives this first excuse. God, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to be able to go. But God doesn't want to hear that excuse. But many of us use that same excuse, don't we? That when God calls you and asks you to do something in your life, when God says, hey, go talk to your neighbor about me. Hey, go share a meal with that person. Hey, go help that person. Go serve in the church in this way. We say, oh, God, I'm not good enough. Maybe it looks a little different on your list. And so on your piece of paper, you can write down, the first thing you can write down is with this excuse, what are some excuses that you think of that maybe go with this? I have mine here that as I was thinking about this, I'm not good enough. The excuses that I've used many times is my life isn't perfect. That I don't have it all figured out, God. That I don't have an impressive resume. I don't have reasons for people to just want to follow me, for them to just want me to be their pastor, whatever that may be. God, I'm too introverted to stand up and talk in front of people all the time. There are times also, God, where I can seem and appear unapproachable to people. And so maybe you have some excuses that are similar to this idea of I'm not good enough. And so what are some of those excuses you've used? Write them down on that piece of paper. Write them down, a word or two, whatever you may need for that, to kind of remind you, these are excuses I've used for God. Then we move on to Moses' second excuse. Verse 13 is where we find that one. And it says, but Moses said to God, if I now come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they are going to ask me, what's this God's name? What am I supposed to say to them? Excuse number 2. I don't have all the answers. God, they're going to ask me a question and I'm not going to know how to answer it. Growing up, Moses had all the advantages of living inside Pharaoh's palace, right? He had all the things available to him so that he could learn. He was a well-educated man. He knew several languages. He had anything he needed so that he could learn. And if he was curious about something, they would bring it in so that he could learn. He had all those things available in front of him. Yet, when God says, go and tell them I have sent you, he says, well, what am I supposed to? I don't know what I'm supposed to tell them. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. And what Moses does here is he makes it about himself instead of about God. Instead of trusting God, this excuse is about saying, well, I don't know. And so because I don't know, then I'm not good enough. But the good news is God isn't looking for know-it-alls. He's just looking for people who are willing to listen. People who are willing to listen to what God has to say to you. That is willing to walk beside God and say, okay, God, this is what you want from me. Even if I don't know a lot about it, I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to try. I'm willing to do what you've asked me to do. Is there something like this on your spiritual excuse list? Is there something that you could be writing down that you've used before as an excuse when it comes to this, I don't have all the answers? Maybe you write down a few things. I wrote down on my paper that, you know what, God, I'm not spiritual enough on the outside. I don't say all the right church words. I don't use brother and sister all the time and shout amen all the time. I'm lucky if I remember when to raise my hands and when to clap. Okay? I'm not that religious church person that we all see around us. And so God, why would they listen to me? I don't use all the right church words. I don't know all the right church language. I've been a part of the church for a long time, but I still don't use all those words correctly and at the right times. As a matter of fact, God, I don't know it all. And even this last week, as I was driving to Colorado and back, the realization is I still don't fully understand what it means to follow Jesus. But I'm learning and I'm willing. That I'm still growing in who I am and who God has called me to be. I've been a pastor for 25 years. And I'm still learning what it means and what God is calling me to and who God is calling me to be. That's still open in me. But I struggle with what it means sometimes. And so that's an excuse. What are some excuses that maybe you have? Those are things to write down on the list now at number 2. Some things that you use that maybe are similar to I don't have all the answers. And then we get to excuse number 3. That what's interesting here too, and I challenge you to go back and look at this whole interaction, because I'm giving you the highlights. But there's discussion back and forth between God and Moses here. But today we're looking at the excuses. So Exodus 4, chapter 4, verse 1 is where we find excuse number 3. It says, "Then Moses replied, 'But what if they don't believe me or pay attention to me? They might say to me, the Lord didn't appear to you.'" So excuse number 3, people won't believe me. People won't believe me. This is a very natural human instinct for us to have. Being vulnerable to people, letting them know what's really going on inside of us, letting them know about our hurts and our hang-ups and our feelings and our frustrations. That's scary. And that's hard to do with people who we consider friends. But now, God, you want me to go share it with my neighbors who I don't know very well? That's a little bit scarier. Or as you want me to go share with those other people over there who might even be hostile to the fact that I am sharing this message with them. God, you want me to do what with all that? People won't believe me. People know who I am, and they see the hurts and the frustrations that I have. They won't believe me. And God says to Moses, then you know what? I'm going to help you get rid of some of that fear. I'm going to help you get rid of some of that fear, and I'm going to give you a couple tools to help you. And God gives us tools along the way. And so if we use the excuse of people won't believe me, or whatever related to that is that you're writing on that piece of paper, we're reminded that God gives us something when we need it to help us. And in this case, he tells Moses, he says, Moses, I'm going to give you 2 miraculous tools to use. Right? First, he goes, you have a rod. Throw that rod on the ground. Then it becomes a serpent. Now pick it up. And it becomes the rod again. Moses couldn't do that. There's no magical power that could do that other than God. And so that was one of his ways to demonstrate to the people that God had sent him. The other way is totally kind of opposite. Take your hand, Moses, stick it into your robe, and then pull it out. And when you pull it out, it's going to be filled with leprosy. You're going to have a major skin disease. And then, while the people are watching, if they're not running away from you at that point, put it back in your robe and pull it out, and your hand's going to be fully healed. Again, only something God can do for you. And so God helps them overcome this doubt and this excuse. People won't believe me. God will equip you, and God will give you what you need to help you with whatever He's asking you to do. He knows you. He knows what you're capable of. He knows what you have as far as resources and education and things around you. He knows what you have, and He'll take care of you. And that's what He's showing here with Moses. And so if you're writing things down for this area of people won't believe me and whatever kind of excuse you want to use there, on my list, I just wrote 4 letters. F-E-A-R. Fear. Because I think it's rooted in the fact that I am just afraid. That fear sometimes controls me and then makes up these excuses to keep me from doing the things that I know God needs me to do. Leading in the way God needs me to lead. Being the person God needs me to be. Fear gets in the way for me. And so I wrote that down as my excuse in this area. And so now maybe some of you may need another piece of paper, right? I'm going to give you half a sheet, front and back. But maybe you're writing down some things, just jotting down some things, just reminding yourself of some of the excuses that you've used for God, with God. And then we get to excuse number 4. Verse 10, Exodus 4, verse 10. But Moses said to the Lord, "My Lord, I've never been able to speak well. Not yesterday, not the day before, and certainly not now, since you've been talking to your servant. I have a slow mouth and a thick tongue." Excuse number 4, I'm a terrible public speaker. Perhaps Moses is being a little humble here. Perhaps Moses is kind of just trying to dim down what he has done and what he's been able to do. Perhaps he really does have a problem with speaking and public speaking. But the good news is that God knows your flaws. So when we use an excuse like I'm a terrible public speaker and you fill in whatever excuse is related to that for you, for me, I wrote down words like I'm a very blunt person. I don't do well with small talk. I often stumble over my words, and I do often when I preach and teach, especially as I get excited, my mouth goes faster than my brain. And so God, why do you have me up there doing all this? But the great thing is that God knows all that about us. That God knows who you are and what you're capable of and what you're able to do. And He knows what you can be. And He knows that you're using excuses to hide behind that. Christy and I spent 3 days up in Estes Park, Colorado. I was at a preaching conference. And one of the main speakers was an ex-NFL player who's planted a church in North Carolina. And he said, I did not want to be a preacher. He didn't even come to Christ until he was playing in the NFL. He didn't even know about Jesus until he was in college. But he had a severe stuttering problem. And so he really didn't want to be a pastor, really didn't want to lead a church. But God has given him tricks and healed him and helped him to be able to be a great communicator. And man, what a powerful speaker he was for us. But in that time, when he was talking about all that, he said something like this. He said, there was a time when I would say, I can't believe God would use a person like me, until I stopped and looked around and saw that's all that God uses, is people like me. And the idea there is that idea that God takes us and He knows who we are and He knows what we're able to do. He knows our weaknesses. He knows our strengths. And we all come with different things and different baggage, and He calls all of us to serve Him. We have a God who knows our excuses, and He loves us anyway, and He wants to use us anyway. That's part of His plan. That's part of His story And as we read the Old Testament and we read the New Testament, and then we hear about the history of the church, today marks the 116th birthday of the Church of the Nazarene. That as a denomination, 116 years ago is when the church officially started in Texas. When churches from the west and the east and the north and the south all came together to form the Church of the Nazarene. And God knew what we all bring into this as a church. And he calls us to come together to be the church, to be part of the story that shares his love through Jesus Christ. And that he sent Jesus to fill in the gaps for us. He sent Jesus to be the one to say, you know what, they're not perfect, but I am. And through me, we will get it right. Through me, we'll get it together, and we'll get this message shared. And so we have excuses that say, maybe I'm a terrible public speaker. I don't have enough finances. I don't have enough nice things. I don't have the right clothes. We use those kind of excuses, and God says, I don't need all that. I just need you to be willing and you to be ready. And after he breaks down all that kind of stuff, after he breaks down all those excuses from Moses, and after he breaks down all of our excuses, all the things that we've written on this piece of paper, and maybe more, we find Moses and his final excuse. Verse 13 says, but Moses said, please, my Lord, just send someone else. Finally, we get to the last excuse, where he basically is saying, I'm not qualified. Moses finally runs out of excuses. He runs out of the general things that he can say. And it finally just comes down to, God, I don't want to. Send someone else. I don't want to. Send someone else. And God says, no, I am calling you. I am calling you, and so quit using these excuses. There's excuses like, I haven't gone to church long enough. I haven't attended enough Bible study groups. I haven't read my Bible well enough. I haven't grown up in the church, and I didn't have parents who taught me about the Bible and about the ways of God. I don't know those neighbors of mine. I don't know their culture. I don't know their language even. I don't even know if they'll listen to me. We have all those excuses that we pile together, and God weeds through all of them as we're open with him and talking with him about it. And finally, it just has to come down to one thing, and it comes down to this last excuse. I don't want to. And God says, I know, but we can do it. I know, but we can make it happen. I know you alone can't do it, but we can do it together. And he promises to give us that. And he makes up things along the way for us. I love how right after this excuse, God says, okay, fine, you're right. Okay, we'll use all these excuses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you your brother Aaron to help you. Now, Aaron was a Levite, so he was a priest, so he's already qualified to do all those things. But I can't imagine that discussion. Moses is like, hey, Aaron, guess what I got for you? And he's like, thanks a lot, Moses. Way to get me involved. I was living life just fine. And now you got me having to do this big project with you. But we make up these excuses. And we say, God, I can't because... And God says, I know, but we can do it together. But we can if we focus on you and focus on the things that I have for you. God patiently walks through everything with us. He patiently looks at our excuses. He patiently takes them all in, and he just systematically checks them off one by one. And says, nope, that's taken care of. Nope, that's taken care of. Until finally you have no more excuses. I've learned that a lot about people over the last 25 years, is that, we all have excuses, but essentially it comes down to one thing. Do you want to or not? Right? I love it when we have a church event and people like to say, hey, I'm not going to be there because I have this. Well, you don't have any of that stuff now. Oh, yeah? I just don't want to. Okay, then just don't want to. That's fine. But have that discussion with God when God calls you and says, hey, I'm challenging you to do this or that. He reminds you that you are capable. He reminds you that he's called you and that he's gifted you with the things that you need for it. How many times have you given God all those excuses and God said, no, do it anyway, and then you do it and it turns out even better than you ever thought? That in order for us to truly bless our community, in order for us to truly bless those around us, we have to notice people. We have to notice the things that are going on around us and the needs that we can meet and the people that we can meet and the interactions we can have. We need to be his ambassador. We need to be sharing our story and showing it to those around us and having those conversations. And essentially, we have a couple more weeks of the sermon series left, but essentially today we have to get rid of the excuses and we have to start living like Paul tells us to live in Colossians chapter 3. In Colossians 3, verse 17, Paul says, whatever you do, whether in speech or action, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus and give thanks to God the Father through him. We are called to journey through this life with Jesus. We are called to hang on sometimes for dear life as he takes us through some exciting times and as he takes us through some excruciating times. Times of anger, times of frustration, times of sadness, times of joy, times of celebration. All those, he calls us and he says, through it all, no matter what you're going through, no matter what we're doing together, Paul says, do it all for Jesus. Your words and your actions. You are called to do it all. And we like to create a list of excuses. And we like to create a list of reasons why we can't do it. But God already knows. And God's already seen you where you're at, and he knows that you're capable and you're able. And he's not calling you and sending you and sitting back going, let's see what happens here. Ready for a good laugh. But he says, no, let's go do this together. And he goes with you. And he brings other people together. That's why we gather together as a church. So that we have a church family who can come together and be with us during these times and help encourage us and help walk alongside of us. And so whenever I want to use an excuse to God, I need to be reminded that God wants me to get rid of my excuses. God simply has one request: to trust me and to obey. So the question this morning is, are you willing to give up those excuses? Are you ready to give God control of those excuses and say, God, I've been doing it on my own. I've been hiding behind these excuses, and life hasn't been the way that I wanted it to be. Things haven't gone the way that I've expected them to go. You see, you keep waking up. Things haven't gone the way that I expect them to go. And God, I need you to intervene. I need to trust you fully. And so as we enter into our reflection time, we have these paper shredders up here. We have one back there by that door also. And we're gonna stand and sing this song together as a reminder of just surrendering our excuses to God. And so if you feel led to, take a moment to pray as we sing these songs. Take a moment just to say, God, I want to hand these excuses over to you. And then while the song's being played, feel free to come forward and just give your excuses to God. Put them in that paper shredder. I don't need to read them. No one else needs to read them. It's between you and God. But take that opportunity just to symbolically say a prayer. Hand those excuses over to God. Like I said, there's one back there by that door, and then there's the three up here. If you're the first one at a shredder, you might have to turn it on. But I think you can handle that. But after we sing this song, I will close us in a time of prayer together. Please stand.